On a grey Thursday in May, the man I was going to marry asked if I could be mature about his affair. I said okay, and then I went to the bank. I'm Elise Lissa Calder, 30, and I live in Pittsburgh in a one-bedroom brick-trim loft over a florist at 2309 Butler Street, Lawrenceville. I'm a civil engineer who works for the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, which means my days are measured in crosswalk stripes, signal timing plans, and flooded catch basins that don't care about anyone's schedule. I keep a pair of steel-toed boots in my trunk and a yellow field book full of pavement notes, and my phone smells faintly of asphalt because sometimes I set it down on fresh thermoplastic without thinking. What keeps me from turning into a traffic cone myself is my hobby, restoring 35mm cameras. Old ones, Minolta SRT 101s, Canon AE1s, Olympus OM1s. I like rescuing something that has weight and gears, something that clicks and advances when you've done the steps right. The first time a shutter I'd cleaned fired at a crisp 11,000 again, it felt like getting a heartbeat back. Grant Bellamy was a heartbeat I thought I'd rescued too. He was 32, broad-shouldered from rowing in college, with easy dimples and a voice dialed to reassure. He co-founded a wellness beverage startup out of a shared commercial kitchen on the south side called Vessel Ferments. Think ginger tamarind kombucha in elegant matte cans with a serif font that cost me an eye roll every time I saw it. The brand lived on Grant's Instagram as if the cans were close friends. He talked about building community, clean energy, and being the change, and he carried his empty coffee cups to the bin without being asked. He's the kind of man who opens your jars and your doors and your calendar. Red flags were there, like the way he said "my girls" about his team, which was really just 2 women, and how he forgot to pay me back for a set of mixing valves because wiring got weird at the commissary. He was always between tranches, running the burn, tight on runway, all the baby bird words that mean feed me or I die. He kissed me like promises but treated debt like weather. Not his fault if it happens. We got engaged on October 8th last year, Mount Washington Overlook, 7:11 p.m., sky like bruised peaches. The ring was a thin band of antique white gold with a marquise diamond and a tiny nick near the tip. He knelt. I said yes. We ate pierogies in a bar where the TVs scream even when muted. He tucked my hair behind my ear and called me his North Star. And I believed I was a compass, not just a point he'd spin until he felt oriented. Money began to leak like bad plumbing. Vessel had a bridge round coming in March, he said, but to get there they needed a bottling line upgrade and a safety certification from NSF. He had a term sheet. He had soft commits. He had a spreadsheet with tabs that made my city spec documents look like coloring books. He asked if I could just float them $15,000. For 4 weeks, 6 tops. He used the word float like the money would never touch ground. I'm not a fool with money. My parents died when I was 22 winter black ice, a guardrail that didn't guard. The settlement was small, the grief large, and what I learned from the actuarial tables and probate offices is you can love people to pieces and still need to count. I made Grant sign a promissory note on February 20th, 27,500 principal. It ballooned to that because the can price jumped and the pallet load minimum went up. 6 APR due upon close of any equity raise over $100,000 or by August 31st, 2024, whichever came first. We had it notarized at the UPS store on 5200 Penn Avenue. He joked that the notary, a woman named Bonnie with glitter on her nails, was the third witness to our love. I filed the original in a fire-retardant folder with my camera negatives. Then he asked if he could be added as an authorized user to my Chase Sapphire, just for points on supply runs, which is what people say when they want your credit as a puppet. I agreed because he sent me a screenshot of a Stripe account showing 18,420 in sales for February, and I let numbers hush my instincts. I set a hard rule with myself. The balance had to be paid in full each month by him, or he lost the card. He nodded like a student parroting safety instructions. There were little insults that didn't feel like insults then. The way he called my job steady, like a compliment, but used the word like it was grey. The quips about how my hobby belonged in a museum, said in a tone that meant, and not in our living room. The texts that ran late because Tasha and I have to run one more batch. Tasha Vale was Vessel's co-founder. 28, hair buzzed on one side, a hoop through her cartilage, and a laugh that stated a minor key, then resolved upward. The first time I met her was at a pop-up market on 19th and Smallman. She wore a canary yellow jumpsuit and had turmeric on both thumbs. She hugged me hard and said, "You're the architect. Thank you for building this man so he can build this." I corrected her, "Engineer." She winked, even hotter. I'm not jealous by nature. I have friends you'd call beautiful, and I love them because that's not a zero-sum game. But Grant started using Tasha's name like punctuation. "Tasha thinks," Tasha said. Tasha told me. He told me their palettes sync. He told me she gets him. People who aren't chasing infidelity don't leave breadcrumb prayers like that. On May 9th, 2024, Vessel launched their new flavor hibiscus lemongrass with adaptogens that probably meant we added a yoga word. The party was at a converted warehouse called the Highline at 1 Mason Street, with brick and draped Edison bulbs and a DJ that made even kombucha sound like a party. Grant got on a plywood stage, dimples loaded, and talked about community. He shouted out the commissary staff, shouted out the 2 angel investors by first names only, which is a startup's way of using asterisks for their own life, and shouted out me, my fiancé who keeps our ship pointed north even when the wind's dumb. People whooped. He looked at me in a way that makes strangers think they're witnessing sincerity. At 9:32 p.m., with cameras out, he and Tasha sprayed a couple cans like winners of something, and he kissed her. It wasn't celebratory and it wasn't accidental. It wasn't even drunken. It was a kiss that had rehearsed itself in somebody's parked Honda. It happened fast and slow at once. The DJ cut the music because the DJ was human. I heard 3 separate gasps, like a chorus with weird timing. Someone near me said, "Oh," in a voice people use in museums when they realize what they're looking at is a crucifixion. I didn't make a scene. I put my half-can sour, like the moment in a recycling bin, and left. At 9:46 p.m., on my sidewalk, my neighbor Mr. Giordano was watering his hanging petunias like he hadn't lived through 3 wars and 5 mayors. "Evening, Elise," he said. "Evening," I said, and felt myself split in 2. Grant came home at 12:23 a.m. He knocked his own code on my door. I didn't let him in. In the stairwell, he said, loud enough for the florist to hear, "Can we be adults?" He said he and Tasha had a connection that predated me in spirit, if not in time. He asked if we could redefine what fidelity means post-capitalism. He used the word mature 3 times, like it was a password he could finally remember. I said okay, not the type of okay that means approval. The type of okay that is a hinge. At 8:10 a.m., I went to PNC Bank at 4750 Butler Street. The teller's name tag said Jules. I closed the joint checking account we'd opened for wedding expenses. Balance, $2,074. 15, recent charges, $428, 20 to C-Vent. We'll look later, 73, 90 to Michael's centerpiece prototypes, and 51. 39 to Uber, oh weird, must have been a work ride. Jules asked if I needed a cashier's check or cash. I said check and held the paper like it was warm. I removed Grant as an authorized user from my Chase card. I moved the automatic transfer that funded our dreamed weekend in the Laurel Highlands. That was just a folder of links and a note that said, October, into my emergency savings. At 11 SEM, I emailed our landlord, Mrs. Chang, whose idea of small talk is lease clauses. I attached a letter, As of May 10th, I revoked any permission for Grant Bellamy to reside in my unit. He wasn't on the lease. I changed the lock cylinder at 6:30 p.m. The locksmith was a woman in a paint-speckled hoodie who seemed delighted to work for someone who had snacks. I bought the cylinder for $61.48 at Bloomfield Hardware and kept the receipt. At 12:42 p.m., I called an employment lawyer named Carmen Esteban. I'd met at a city committee hearing about bike lanes. She referred me to a contracts attorney, Neil Kirsch, who looked like a dinosaur that had put on human clothes. At 4:15 p.m., I emailed Neil the promissory note, the notarization, and a PDF of the Stripe screenshot from February with that $18,420 plus 3 months of vessel invoices Grant had forwarded me to show momentum. Neil wrote back at 7:02 p.m. This is enforceable. We'll send a demand letter on Monday. Keep records of any communications. Do not engage in arguments. Do not let him back in the apartment. Formal things give grief a spine. I set up a new folder on my laptop, Documents Grant 2024. I started subfolders, legal, banking, lease, screenshots. I exported text threads as PDFs, not the content in list form, but screenshots a judge would understand, with dates and times and a context bubble that cannot be argued with. I wrote an inventory of items in my apartment that belonged to him. A 12-cup Chemex, a Bluetooth speaker, 2 pairs of rowing shoes, a grey zip hoodie with a tiny oil stain near the pocket, and photographed them on the dining table with a newspaper in frame to timestamp them. I boxed them and labeled the box GB Personal Hold 30 Days Pickup by APP only. When he found out at 3:09 p.m., he tried to buy a $298 pair of brand partnership sneakers on my card and got declined. My phone buzzed itself into a seizure. He called 6 times. He texted paragraphs about how I was making a mistake with our future, how I was ruining momentum, how I was breaking trust, the last of which made me laugh, but not in a way that fixed anything. I replied once, "Please direct financial communications to my attorney. Personal items available for pickup by appointment next Tuesday between 5 to 7 p.m. only. Do not come to my workplace." It took me 3 minutes to type because my hands insisted on shaking like it was their job. The appointment Tuesday came. He didn't. Instead, at 6:12 p.m., Tasha came. She wore a navy jumpsuit under a jean jacket, hair tucked under a beanie despite it being 71 degrees. She looked more keyed than angry. "He's a mess," she said, her mouth hard. "He told me you'd understand." "I do," I said, and handed her the box. She sniffed. "He thought you'd be bigger about this," she added, which is something people say when what they mean is smaller. "Tell him the demand letter goes out Monday," I said. "Tell him I will not be financing his mess." 2 days later, Grant showed up at my office, even though I told him not to. The city building is glass and polite, but not friendly, the kind of place where security guards keep their little wry jokes holstered. He waited by the turnstiles, eyes wide and red like he'd discovered emotions. He held a bag of takeout from Gaucho and said we were settling this like adults. I stood 6 feet back and spoke in that voice women learn, sweet enough not to earn a slur, sharp enough not to be ignored. "Grant," I said, "you are trespassing at my workplace. Please leave." He didn't, so I had security escort him out. I wrote an incident report at 3:32 p.m. I emailed it to myself and BCC'd Neil. That night, a string of texts arrived. "You made me look crazy. You don't have to do this. I love you. You're an accountant about feelings. You were supposed to be my family. Tasha needs me. Tasha's not coping. Tasha's having a panic attack. Please talk to me. I'll be there in 10. He wasn't bluffing. At 11:48 p.m., he pounded my door so hard, Mr. Giordano called through his own door, "Police." At 11:52 p.m., there were police. 2 officers, McCluskey and Huang, stood in my kitchen while I explained. I showed them the texts, my lease, the demand letter draft, the lock receipt. They told him to leave and not return. I asked about a protection from abuse order, and one officer said, "That's for family or intimate partners." I said, "Fiancé counts," and filed the next morning. The hearing date was set for May 23rd, 9 a.m., family court at 440 Ross Street. I arrived with a binder that made the judge visibly relieved. The PFA was granted for 3 months. He stared at the floor through the whole thing. I stared at my page numbers. Meanwhile, the demand letter landed. It was crisp as a winter sky, citing paragraph and subsection, giving dates and amounts. 27,500 principal, 102. 50 accrued interest as of May 20th, 450 in attorney fees to date, total due within 15 days of receipt, or the matter would proceed to filing in Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas. "You will not contact our client directly regarding this matter," it said, and seeing "our client" attached to my name was like being handed a seatbelt mid-crash. Vessel tried to pivot around it. I watched their Instagram posting through a burner account because I am both done and curious. They posted glossy stories with the kind of captions that say nothing and mean it. They scheduled a brand pop-up near Shenley Plaza. It got cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances, which meant we forgot that consequences exist. A week after the PFA, Tasha called. Not texted. Called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. Her voice was sandpaper. "I need to return something," she said, "please." I called back because I'm not only my anger. She arrived at 5:09 p.m., carrying a tote with Vessel's logo, and pulled out a glass jar not meant for cameras. Inside were my old Minolta prism caps. "He took these," she said. "He liked how they looked in flat lay photos." I told him they were yours. He said you wouldn't miss them. We sat on my couch, the one with a sun-bleached patch shaped like a cat I never had. She didn't apologize. She told the truth. They had been sleeping together since late March, not every day, but often enough that you couldn't call it an accident anymore. He'd pitched it to her as a thing that happens when you're building something, as if faithfulness works like fermentation, unpredictable and somewhat sexy. When the kiss at the launch happened, it wasn't spontaneous. They'd planned it to feel real. She said that and then flinched at her own words. "I said no at first," she went on. "I said you were good. He said you were safe, not good." It's funny what offends you most. Out of all the insults, safe, not good, stuck in my throat like a fishbone because I like safe. I build safe. People get to live because safe exists. I said, "He will pay me." She said, "He thinks you won't push it because you love him." I said, "He's thinking of a version of me that doesn't exist." She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "I think he's thinking of himself," she said. Then the escalation turned sloppy. He showed up at my gym, the Jewish Community Center in Squirrel Hill, on Saturday at noon. He doesn't even have a membership. He waited by the treadmills and told me, "We're both being stubborn." I showed him the PFA paperwork again, and the front desk supervisor called the police without me asking. I prefer professionalism that anticipates. I added the incident to my binder with the little sticky tabs. He emailed me at my city address using the word urgent, an excellent way to ensure his emails get filtered to Neil. He sent flowers to my office. A senior project manager named Dawn distributed them to the interns with a wink and a raised eyebrow that pulled me back to earth. Neil filed suit on June 5th. The docket number was GD 24-007931. Vessel's bridge round apparently didn't bridge. He offered $10,000 today and the rest when funding hits. I said no. I have a relationship with my future self. She needs me to not take crumbs. Meanwhile, I lived. At work, I finished a plan for a series of four-way stops in Homewood that took into account a church's Sunday parking habits and the swagger of traffic that thinks it owns Saturdays. I ordered a silicone light seal kit and rebuilt the back of a Pentax K1000 with the kind of care I used to reserve for people. The good morning texts I wasn't getting left. Silence I could hear the shutter through. Then the bright edge on the storm, a new project arrived when I wasn't looking for it. The Carnegie Museum of Art put out a call for community volunteers to help digitize a trove of steelworker family photos unearthed in a shuttered hall in Homestead. I signed up on a whim that felt like a plan. At the first session, a man introduced himself as Matteo Iannelli, 34, with hands nicked the way someone's hands get nicked when they also fix things. He's a conservator, which means he stitches the past back together and calls it work. He looked at the camera I brought, the one with the Minolta logo I'd re-enameled in white, and said, "That's a beautiful machine. You keep the match needle working." I lit up in a way a person forgets they can. "I do," I said. "Remind people they're light if they line things up." We scanned photographs of birthdays from the 1950s, people standing in yards in dresses that would make TikTok cry, a boy holding a puppy and a popsicle like proof of summer, a line of men with soot on their faces and pride like a suit they wore. We catalogued them, labeled them, touched the edges like they could crumble, because sometimes memory does that. Matteo tested the exposure of negatives with a densitometer and wrote notes that were partly about light, partly about grief. He asked where I'd learned to clean prism foam without stripping the mirror, and I said, forums and stubbornness. He laughed. He didn't ask for anything of me that cost me. Grant tried one last time to make noise. On July 1st, he posted a wordy story on Vessel's account about narratives and false allegations, and the toxicity of legalism in relationships, which was a weird blend of jargon and pseudo-spirituality, like a TED Talk fell in a puddle. He referenced me without naming me, implying that I couldn't handle the heat of a startup. A friend sent it with the message, "You want me to burn this man down?" I said, "No." The judge in our case would not love viral drama. Also, I wasn't trying to make the internet my roommate. On July 9th, an envelope arrived. It was a cashier's check drawn on PNC for $29,052.50. The memo said, "Full satisfaction of note." A separate check followed a week later from his attorney for $950, settlement for part of my attorney's fees. The rest to be considered in a consent judgment if he missed any court-ordered payment. Neil smiled like a man who enjoys conversion of promises into numbers. "They found money," he said, "or their parents did. That night I took the K1000 I'd rebuilt and walked to 33rd Street Bridge. The sky over the Allegheny stacked itself in blue slabs. I shot the last frame of a roll on bulb mode, letting the river write to the film. When I rewound it, the crank made that sound I like more than any apology I've ever received. It wasn't just the money, it was the ledger that replaced a person. He'd been my partner, now he was a line item. The surprising thing about turning love into an invoice is that sometimes you get paid. Tasha left Vessel a week later. She sent me a photo of a resignation letter that said, "This is me choosing myself finally." I didn't respond. She didn't need me for that part. Vessel posted a rebrand, clean cans, no names, lots of white space. Someone said they'd seen Grant working day shifts at a restaurant on 9th Street. That's not a tragedy. That's what a person does when the bridge goes out. Matteo asked if I wanted to stay late after a digitization session to look at a Leica I had threatened to clean for months. We sat with it like it might confess something, and I showed him how I flick dust without touching the shutter curtains, how I use a tiny drop of naphtha and a good cotton swab to coax age without stripping it. He watched with patience, asked if he could try, did it 1 millimeter at a time. When he lifted the camera to his eye and pressed the shutter, he didn't say, "Do you think of your ex when you fix things?" He said, "This is a good sound." The PFA expired in August. By then, I didn't need it. I still carry a copy in my glove compartment because hope is a liar and habits are reliable. I keep the rolls of digitized families in a folder on my desktop named Light, and occasionally scroll through them when I forget what continuity looks like. The checks cleared, the case closed. The landlord said, "You did everything right," which is the kind of sentence you can only hear when you've already survived. In September, on a day the air finally quit pretending it was summer, Matteo and I walked along River Avenue and took photographs of dogs that looked pleased to be dogs. He asked if I wanted to get a coffee. I said yes. Love doesn't have to be a startup. It can be a slow repair. It can be a matched needle aligning to remind you that light is there if you line things up. Sometimes, when I pass the High Line, I remember the DJ's silence and the way one kiss can be a performance and an obituary. Sometimes I think about Grant saying mature like a toddler who learned a new word. He told me, on that grey Thursday, to be a grown-up about his affair. I said okay, and I was. And he learned what maturity looks like on a bank ledger.